Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sathology Debunking Mythology. Today we have a very special guest, and you have seen him many times in the past, extremely popular on the show. And also, we have brought out very good content in the past with this guest. Today, we are sharing or we'll have a discussion on the impact of Indian cuisine or cooking science, food science on India to East. It's a huge topic, but we'll try to see how much we can cover it. It's a huge topic because if you go there, everything looks Indian. You go to Thai, anywhere else. So let us discuss it. And the Western propaganda has been to separate everything out in smaller parts. And the Western propaganda is generally that everything is independent and there is no relation with each other because they try to impose a Western mindset on other people. So, with that in mind, let us welcome Shri Prashant Pool. Namaskar, Prashant
Thank
ji.
you, Adit. Yeah,
So, India has a global, so even though British colonized India, I'm just giving one example, but the national dish of Britain is curry today, not fish and chips. So,
Adit, sorry, let me interrupt in between. Today, what I would like to say before talking about the cuisine, that how Indian footprints were there in the entire East.
uh,
I mean, how the Hindu culture is there, and still you can see and you can feel the Hindu culture in most of the part of the world. Today, we will be talking mostly on the eastern part of the world,
mhm.
and then we will talk about the
Yes.
later on further about the cuisine, how the cuisine is impacted over the entire east. I think that will be better, so we'll create a foundation and then we'll talk more about that.
So in the Hindu footprint in the East, when we talk about Hindu footprint, then literally everything, right from India to Cambodia, looks Indian. Like I was telling you about the Shanghai, that Shanghai is has so many lotuses that you don't feel that you are in any other part of the world. Uh,
Very true.
Even though people may not like Shanghai nowadays, but just it is still a very culturally connected to India. Lhasa, I was told that just 80 years back, it had more than 70 Hindu temples. Just 80 years
Yes.
back, 70 to 100 Hindu temples. So, what is your view on Hindu footprints on the East, generally overall?
Yeah.
What do you consider as a footprint first, so that we can
Yeah.
elaborate?
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Aditya, that there was a very famous economist who is well known worldwide, is Professor Angus Madison.
Yeah.
Professor Angus Madison was basically a British, and then he was teaching economics in the universities of Netherlands. He wrote few books which are quite popular worldwide. One of the book is The Millennium Perspective of Economics. Another book was The History of Economics, and like that. In all his books, with all the proofs, he has maintained and he has proved that the Indian share in the world trade was around one third, around 1000 years back. So he was talking about the 11th century. In the 11th century, he has given very specific data, and based on that, he said that the Indian share was 32.6% in the worldwide trade. And therein, naturally, when Indians were exporting a lot of things, other than the not only spices but the spices, and then with the cloths, cotton, and so many other, even the iron and so many other things they were exporting worldwide. Naturally, Indians were moving around the world. So someone, in India, they say that Vasco da Gama has literally found out India and all. This is all bullshit and rubbish, because it's not question of Vasco da Gama. Even thousands year before that, Indian ships were going literally worldwide. And therefore, we must understand that Indian or Hindu footprints are there in eastern part as well as western part, everywhere. And when we talk about the eastern part, you will find more kind of footprints, because more stronger footprints, because they are still there. I mean, that culture still exists up to certain extent.
See, Vasco da Gama, he found out India, sea route to India from an European point of view.
Yes.
And Europeans can always say that. Like, for example, our Subhash Chandra Bose went to Japan. We can always claim in a big way that our Subhash Chandra Bose went to Japan to do that. That's a cultural, if I am telling to my people, I'm only going to talk about my people. That my
Yes.
uncle went somewhere else, my father went there, my husband, my wife, or my whatever we have relations, we'll talk about it.
Yes.
It is for the Indian historians to talk that
Yes.
we went there, we went here. Because
Mhm.
if you expect Europeans to tell you the pride of your culture, it's not going to happen. But
Absolutely.
our mindset has been changed that unless the Europeans tell us something, then only we believe in something.
Very well
You are
said.
doing you have written such a wonderful book, and so nobody is saying that Prashant Pol said this and he discovered that, and there are many other economists who have done it in the past.
True. True. True.
So
True. Very true.
so the problem lies in our mindset in how we depict our own history.
Yes. Very true.
So
Very true.
so when we say Cholas, number one Cholas, so
Yes.
they carried huge culture to the east, huge.
Yes. Yes.
And so what do you think that Thailand is like, according to you? What is the culture of Thailand?
Yeah. That, I mean, that's precisely what you said. Generally, I ask questions to many people, that which is the largest place of worship in the world. So many say that it is the Vatican. Someone says that it is the Makkah, Medina. Or someone says that the new masjid which came out in the Oman and all. They all are wrong. The largest place of worship in the world, or the biggest place of worship in the world, is a Hindu temple, and the temple is not in India. That's in Cambodia,
Cambodia,
Angkor Wat.
Angkor Wat.
It's there in all the records that the largest place of worship. And so this is I mean, all Indians should, or everyone should be aware about it, that Hindu place of worship is the largest. And the question when I ask, which is the country which carries a Hindu temple on its national flag? You can imagine a Hindu temple on the Indian national flag. Even we can't imagine. But there is a country which very proudly say that yes, this Hindu temple, and that's the only one kind of element is there on the national flag, and that's the Hindu temple. And that country is Cambodia. Cambodia is carrying the Angkor Wat. Wat means temple in that local language. So Cambodia's Angkor Wat, which is a Hindu temple, is there as a symbol on the Cambodian national flag. That's a major thing. And now, whether it's a Cambodia, as you rightly said, whether it's a Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, we name it. All these Southeast Asian countries, they all have a very rich Indian civilization, very rich Indian culture, and they still carry it. Now, let's take an example of Cambodia. In Cambodia, when first Hindu king has come, or first Hindu person has come, nobody knows about it. But it says that people say that around 200 years before the Christ, that is 2200 years from now, I mean, earlier, there was a person, he was not a king. The person name is Kaundinya, Shailaraj Kaundinya. He went to Cambodia, and he fell in love with the daughter of the king. They call it Nagakanya, a snake daughter of snake. They generally call it. Entire eastern part, eastern to India, eastern part of the world, generally has, we call it in Sanskrit, Matru Sattak system. Matru Sattak means generally worldwide we have a, the parental system is from the father. So we use the name of the father and father's father, like that. Wherein most of the Eastern countries have this kind of names and all comes from the mother side. And that's why in the Sanskrit we call it Matru Sattak Paddhati system. So then he became the king of Cambodia. That time the name was not Cambodia. And he was, turned out to be a very good emperor, very good king. One thing is very important: no Hindu king has fought to any country. India or Indians or Hindu never invaded any country. None. There is no, absolutely no example as such. So he went there. He basically became a king, then created a kind of dynasty, but it was very public welfare kind of dynasty. He solved a major problem of Cambodia, that is the water problem. He created a lot of canals, and Cambodia became a kind of rich. So his dynasty was there till 631 AD. I mean, after Christ, it was 631, year 631. And till the time this dynasty was there, Chinese used to call it as a Funan dynasty or Funan kingdom. After Funan, there was a person, because then, generally it happens when one reaches to the peak, then there are a lot of other impurities come into the entire governance, the kingdom, and all. And therein, there was a person called Kambu. He went there, he created his own kingdom, and he became the king. And then around 350 years, he ruled that Cambodia. And then it was called Cambodge, which is now we call it as a Cambodia. From 9th or 10th century, Khmer was another dynasty which started ruling, and that ruled for around 300, 400, 500 years later on. But when India was invaded by the Muslim invaders, naturally Indian that culture, that language, that all the civilization, that didn't have the strong relationship with Cambodia and other southeastern countries. So naturally, when you don't have the kind of the strong relationship with the parental country, sort of, because those were the extended arm of India, sort of. So when you don't have that kind of relation, naturally, the culture or civilization in this Southeast Asian countries were also not that strong. And then other cultures, other this thing, civilization started, coming into that region. But that is what, say, for example, Cambodia. Now coming to Thailand, which you asked, what is Thailand? Bangkok is, we all know, capital of Thailand, and many of us have probably might have visited the Bangkok, particularly Bangkok airport. Bangkok airport is known as the Suvarna Bhumi airport. It's very nice, very huge, very big. In that Suvarna Bhumi airport, place of attraction is a huge sculpture. Huge statue or sculpture, huge sculpture. The sculpture is, in Sanskrit we call it Samudra Manthan, churning of ocean. Huge. Wherein you'll find the king and the gods and demons, and they are churning, and Vishnu is coming, like that. So it was basically a churning of ocean, which is a in Indian Indian history or Puran, you call it. There is a concept called churning of ocean. That is there, very huge. Many people come there to have a selfie and all. It's a selfie point, sort of. But very close to that. I mean, I'm saying that even the Indian kind of this heritage they carry with a pride, that yes, we have that. But many people do not visit that. Very close to that, there is a map, huge map, and that map is the ancient map, around 1,000 years back, around 900 years back. That map, one part of the map is they have written there, it's a Purushpur, and bracket they have written Peshawar. So Purushpur, and other side they have written Papua New Guinea. So from Purushpur, that's from Peshawar to Papua New Guinea, it was a Hindu empire or Indian empire. And therein they have shown a place called Siam. Thailand's earlier name was Siam. So they have mentioned there as Siam, and there was a line which says that we are proud to be a part of Indian Empire. So country like Thailand also feels that yes, we were the part of that great Hindu empire because Hindu culture, Hindu civilization, and still they follow it. This is really great. In a Thailand, even right now we have that kind of that kingdom sort of thing and all. King is still there, though there is democracy, but king is still there. And the current king's name is Mahavajira Longkorn. Mahavajira Longkorn. He's king of Thailand. The name of the Indian meaning of it is there is a Indian god called Indra. So Indra, who is carrying a weapon called Vajra. Sanskrit they call it Vajradhari Indra. That's the meaning of this Mahavajira Longkorn, meaning of that king. This king had recently, last year, did the rituals to become a king, to announce as a king. And all rituals were completely by the Hindu system, Hindu way of doing it with the Veda mantra and all. He did that, and he called himself as a tenth Rama, the great Ram, the great Sri Ram. They still follow. They say that in Thailand, Siam, they say that Ayodhya, which is known for King Rama, they say that Ayodhya is not in the Ayodhya of India. They said, that's not Ayodhya. Real Ayodhya is in Thailand. Real Ayodhya is in Siam, close to Bangkok. And even the Bangkok main roads are Rama 1, Rama 2 and all. They've given the name like that. They respect Indian culture very well. They feel that and they feel proud to be carrying this kind of Indian culture and all. If someone ask me that Lord Ganesha is one of the Hindu god, very well known, respected all over the world, and almost every part of the world you will find that people worship Lord Ganesha. If someone asks that which is the country of Lord Ganesha, the answer is Thailand. In Thailand, you will find a huge statues of Lord Ganesha. Huge. Lord Ganesha is called Praphikanet in Siam, in Thailand. Praphikanet. And they worship Lord Ganesha. For every new venture, Lord Ganesha has to be worshipped. And I said that there are huge statues of Lord Ganesha, huge idols of Lord Ganesha. One of them is 150 feet high. So one is standing, other is sleeping Ganesha, other is sitting on the Sihasana and like that. So when we talk about the Thailand, a lot of temples, Hindu temples are there. In temple, they call it Wat in the entire Southeast Asia. So Thailand is still, lot of Hindu footprints are still quite obvious. You need not to dig them. You need not to find them. They're there. They're there. So like that, you will find that all other, even the countries, Southeast Asia, you will find that Indian footprints are there.
When the British in 1948, before 1948, Myanmar today, which is known as, earlier it was known as Burma, Burma, and before that, earlier Mahabharat Kalin name is Brahmadesh.
Brahmadesh
is the only country where the whole country worship Brahma, the material creator.
Yes,
they wanted to merge with India, and that time Jawaharlal Nehru opposed it. And they wanted in 1948, they wanted to merge with India because they thought, because you have seen many movies from Rangoon, India,
Yes.
many movies, actresses, actors, and Japanese theater, Burma, the first thing they conquered. So even Burma had the same thing because they're all, even today, the temples in Burma are still there, huge Hindu population.
Yes, yes.
and and then the later on we see the conflicts also over there. I don't want to name any conflict there, but
Yes,
huge Hindu population there.
yes.
And so what is your view on Philippines? I will be very interesting to know because I have some information on Philippines.
Okay.
I was one of the directors of Filipino American Trade Association in San Diego. I was only
Okay.
Indian there, and that
I
too at
see.
the top position. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Philippines is, as you are aware that again in Philippines you in order to find the Hindu footprints, they are there, and quite obviously they are there. But prior to Philippines, I just would like to highlight the Indonesia. Indonesia is a very unique example. One need to quote, because in Indonesia you will find that the maximum population of Muslims in the world. So the highest Muslim population in the world is in Indonesia, and still Indonesia is in that sense a Hindu country, and they are proud that we carry these Hindu symbols. Their currency note, they print Lord Ganesha's picture. So Lord Ganesha's picture is there on their currency note. They call their bank as Koshagar. Kosh means in Sanskrit, Kosh means wherein we keep the money and all wealth. So wealth, the place of wealth, that is Koshagar. They call it bank as Koshagar. Their airline's name is Garuda Airways. Garuda is the savior of who fought with Ravana in the Ramayana. So Garuda's mention is there in the Ramayana. So it's like Garuda Airways. There, surprisingly, there in Indonesia, their national what can I say? The national symbol, or what they describe as their country, like we call ourselves as a Satyameva Jayate, is our kind of wording which we describe ourselves as a what India is. This India's distinct symbol is Satyameva Jayate. Like that, Indonesia's kind of symbol is Bhinne ka Tugala Ika. Bhinne ka. Bhinna means Sanskrit mein Bhin means different. Ika one. So it is unity in diversity. So Indonesia's theme of the country is unity in diversity. Bhinneka Tugal Ika. Point here is that they use a lot of Sanskrit words. Lot of Sanskrit words. Their Bahasa Indonesia. Bahasa is basically a bhasha. Bhasha. So bhasha, they call it Bahasa. So Bahasa Indonesia carries more than 60 to 70% Sanskrit words. So I may not able to read Bahasa Indonesia, but if someone speaks slowly in Bahasa Indonesia, I can understand overall meaning of it. I may not understand the exact meaning of it, but I can understand overall meaning of it, because there are a lot of Sanskrit words are there. And if one can know Sanskrit a bit, one can understand Bahasa Indonesia up to a certain extent, at least the meaning of it. That's the beauty of it. So this Indonesia was earlier called as Java, Sumatra, Java and Sumatra. Now, even Java was mentioned in even the earlier Brahma Puran and so many other Puran and earlier Hindu, Grantha books. They carry a name called Yavadvip. Yavadvip is nothing but a Java. So initially, Indonesia is we all know that a lot of islands are there. So there was Java Island, Bali Island, Sumatra Island, and all. So Java and Sumatra are basically, they created the Indonesia, today's Indonesia, and it's their belief that there was a person called Aji Shak from India who came to that Java Sumatra, and he fought with the evil spirit in Indonesia, the then Indonesia, around 2005 years, 2500 years back, and then he created his empire and all. In Sumatra, there was a great empire, and the empire name was Sri Vijaya Empire. It was a wealthy empire. It was a complete Hindu empire. It was a public welfare empire because so many people have written about Srivijaya Samrajya. Around 500, 600 years during that span, the Srivijaya empire was there. And there is there was a Chini traveler whose name was Itsing, and he was very much fond of learning the this Buddha religion and more about Buddhism and all. He was basically a Buddha disciple. He wanted to learn more about Buddha. So those days, Nalanda University was the largest university in the world. After the Takshashila was down, then Nalanda was there. So he wanted to come to Nalanda. So he was from Guangzhou province of China. He started from Guangzhou, and then someone told him that without knowing Sanskrit, what are you going to do in the Nalanda? So you have to learn Sanskrit. So what he did, he wrote a lot of things which is there in the Chinese, published in the Chinese also. So he wrote his own sort of diary, and therein he has mentioned that 6 to 7 years he was in Sri Vijaya Empire. And the way he described the Sri Vijaya Empire was fabulous. Such a wealthy empire, but they all were very keen about the needs of a common person. The kings always try to find that a common person must be satisfied. And the way he has mentioned about how the governance was run in the Sri Vijaya Samrajya was excellent, far than excellence. And at the same time, they were almighty kind of thing. They were quite powerful in nature. They had a lot of shapes, and so many things are there which he had mentioned. Unfortunate part is, after, as I said, that after India lost its own kind of, during few years, India was invaded by the by the invaders and all. So India was cut from all this Southeastern Asian countries. So naturally, the cultural link was not as strong as it was earlier, after 12th or 13th century. So naturally, after 12th or 13th century, the link and the bonding and all was not there. Naturally, they started forgetting about their own culture and this and that to a certain extent. And somehow, the Sri Vijaya empire, Sri Vijaya Samrajya, was almost forgotten. In 1920, a French archaeologist who was working in there in Indonesia, in the Sumatra island, and then he found out. Then he did lot many things. Then lot many sculpture, lot many. He did excavation and so many things he did. Then they found out. Then they found out from Chinese travelers. They found out from various other travelers. They found that Sri Vijaya Samrajya was such a great Samrajya. So till 1920, we were not aware about it. So from around 1400 to 1920, 500 years, the Sri Vijaya Samrajya, which was one of the great empire in those days, were almost not existed. So that was basically the state of our heritage, unfortunate part of it.
One of the things which really strikes me, since you are telling in a very organized way, is that the Europeans, they fought for small pieces of land all their life.
Yes,
The French Gauls, they have fighting with the French, rest of the French. Then Germans, there was a problem in Germany
yes,
where they divided into a small country. Italy, we already know. Spaniards, we already know. The Europeans had no idea about the rest of the world. So there is a very famous saying in Sanskrit, Atmate Manyate Jagat.
yes,
What you think the whole world is like that. And since they conquered many of the areas, colonized, not conquered, for their own profits, because each European country wanted to be richer than the others. It was not about it was their pride to enslave some other people, steal their wealth. So French always tried to prove their wealth that they can become richer than the British, and the Spaniards, they wanted to be richer than the French as well as the English. And within Britain also, the English conquered Welsh, and the English conquered Scottish. English conquered uh, Ireland. Now they imposed their own mindset on the rest of the world. They could never imagine that large pieces of land and people can live harmoniously with each other. So most of the conflicts are initiated by the European colonizers. I call them faith-based colonizers because they all wanted to conquer, to spread their faith, pretty much. So when they came to India, the word Indian, even though it's originates from Hindu, it originates from there, and the Greeks called it India first time because of Hindu. So they say India. India is the land. Sindhu, Hindu Mahasagar. This is all documented in Vedic
Yes.
scriptures, and from where the word came Indian. But in the European parlance, Indian means a backward person.
Mm.
Backward in Hindi they call it Dehati, like
Mhm.
person who are not civilized. So they imposed all those things. So they could never imagine. So when they wrote the history from colonizers' point of view, then they broke down every single region according to the European power to which they belong to. And that's why I asked you a question about Philippines, because their ancient language Tagalog,
Yes.
which is based on Brahmi script. Script is still Brahmi to till date,
Ami. Yes. Yes.
and which is Sanskrit based. So they they speak the Filipino language comes very close to our Hindi Sanskrit language,
Yes.
but because they were colonized by the Spaniards, so now they have Spanish surnames, and parts of the world. Vasco da Gama was a Portuguese.
Yes.
So when he came to India, he landed in a place near Goa,
Mhm.
and then he made it a Portuguese colony. But all of these European powers imposed their own mindset on the people they colonized,
Yes.
and they divided them into small pieces. And like Thailand was, Burma was French, partially
Yes.
French, and then later on Japanese came, and then the British tried to rule it over because it was close to India. So most of these countries they have been purposely disconnected
Mhm.
so that the Europeans can claim their own share. So, and there was a treaty in Europe where the French would not want to fight with the English in the colonies. They
Yes.
would like to fight in the there, but later on, it did come to the colonies too. So this was going on, and therefore somehow the Indians are made to believe, and I think the Indian historians have not done a good job. They continued their Macaulay and Max Muller's mindset. They have also eliminated these people out.
Yes.
Like we'll cover in the India to West later on in the next session.
Mhm.
So there is a country called Laos. So
Yes.
have you done any research on that, Laos?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yes.
Laos. The interesting part regarding Laos is it's a small country, as we all are aware. Laos, even today, follows the calendar which is like a Indian calendar. Indian calendar is a bit different. Indian months are different. We call it Chaitra, Vaishak, Jet, Ashad, like that. So, Buddhist also follow the same kind of calendar. So, Laos follow this kind of calendar only. So, you will find that Chaitra, Vaishak, and all those kind of months are there in Laos. Second thing is that the New Year of Laos is almost the same time when Indian or Hindu New Year is there. We call it, Varsha Pratipada. In India, we call it Gudi Padwa, also we call it. So, Laos New Year happens or falls exactly during the same time. And, who basically created Laos is a sort of a great country. According to Laos history, the first Hindu king was Shrutavarman, and Shrutavarman was a king who basically, tried to create a big kingdom and created a welfare country. And his capital was Shreshtapur. And Laos was basically a Hindu country for around 1,000 years. Laos was a Hindu country. Whether Laos or the Java, Sumatra, that's Indonesia, or Siam, that's Thailand, or Brahmadesh or Malaysia, they all were basically Hindu culture. Hindu kind of revenue system was there. Hindu kind of public welfare was there. They tried to bring all the Hindu advancement or all the Hindu inventions which they did in India. Because as we all are aware, India was very rich in so many things, whether it's astronomy, whether it's a chemistry, physics, mathematics. They tried to bring all of that knowledge to these Southeast Asian countries. And the Sanskrit in entire part of this part of the world, as the Thailand airport was rightly showing, that from Purushpur, that's from Peshawar to Papua New Guinea, it was a Hindu empire, and Sanskrit was not only a language of governance, Sanskrit was not only the language of administration, Sanskrit was also a language of common people. And that's the reason why Indonesia, Bahasa Indonesia has a lot of Sanskrit words. That's why, precisely as you rightly said, Philippines has that Brahmi script, and at the same time, a lot of Sanskrit words are there. You will find a Sanskrit word, even the Laos, Sanskrit word, Vietnam, Sanskrit words are still there. That is because Sanskrit was a language which was used by even the common people. And this way, the Upanishad, all the verses were recited every day. Ramayana, Mahabharat was the kind of books which were everyone was keeping at their home. Gita was recited every day. So it was a very harmonious, it was a very with lot of wealth. The entire empire was there. There are a lot of kingdoms, a lot of empires were there, but the culture was almost everywhere same. Vietnam, we generally call it as a communist country. It was a communist country. Okay, fine. But Vietnam was a completely Hindu Rashtra. We call it Hindu country. Vietnam had those days, I'm talking about 1500 years back, 1000 years back, has 5 main provinces. The name was Indrapur. It is written in Vietnamese history. I'm not quoting it. I'm not saying myself. It is there. I'm quoting the history book from Vietnam. They said that we had 5 provinces. Name of the 5 provinces were Indrapur was one, Amravati Champa was second, Vijay Champa was third, Kauthar was fourth, and Panduranga Champa was the fifth one. All were Indian names or Hindu names rather. And those 5 provinces were there, and it has also mentioned that how the entire governance was basically implemented there. And the kind of great kings there in Vietnam, it was Champa those days. Bhadravarman, Gangaraj, Vijayvarman, Rudravarman, Ishanvarman, they were really great kings. They were really powerful, mighty, brave. At the same time, they were quite educated. They knew how to govern such a big country. And that's why they were known in the history. Unfortunately, many of us are not aware about their names. Many of us were not aware about even this Vijayanagar, this Vijaya Samrajya. We didn't know that what this Champa is, what this earlier Java, Sumatra is, and how the culture was there. That is unfortunately the sad part of it. Even today in Vietnam, there are few people who follow this. They are called from Cham culture. It was Cham culture. They call Cham, Hindu culture. There are still few people are there who follow the Hindu culture, complete Hindu. I mean, Hindu religion, Hindu culture, whatever you may say. They are called Cham. These Cham people are basically as a kind of a minority. They had given the status of minority in Vietnam and Laos, in both the countries. The Cham people are there who still follow the Hindu religion very religiously. Like Bali in Indonesia is around 90% Hindus are still there. Indonesia, anyway, I was just talking about Indonesia. Indonesia's, even in Indonesia, if you ask what is Indonesia, they call it Indonesia's name. In Indonesia, they call it Deshantar. Deshantar meaning, it's again Sanskrit word. Deshantar means it's a India which is beyond the ocean. So India beyond the ocean is basically Deshantar. That's why even the name is Indonesia, probably with similarity to India. They might have given the name Indonesia, but that is basically it. And yeah, and what I was about to say is about China. I would like to quote only a few things because I know that time is there. Uh, okay. In China, had lot of Indian impact, Indian culture, in the Hindu and Buddhism, all are there. There are two things I just wanted to quote. One is that uh, during the 12th century, the the Chinese king wanted to build some sort of temples with Buddha statues, Buddha idols, and Hindu gods. Because you will find that a lot of Hindu temples are there in China, in a place called Quanzhou. Quanzhou is a port, and therein there are 40 temples are there. In those 40 temples, you will find that a lot of inscripted is there. So that whatever that is written there, that is in Mandarin, in a Sanskrit, and in Tamil, because lot of Tamil traders used to do the trading with China, and they used to come to that port. So in Quanzhou, you'll find a lot of Indian temples are there. But that I'm talking about this 12th century, where in that time the Angkor Wat, the largest or the biggest place of worship in the world, when it was building, rather they were creating that Angkor Wat. During the same time, the Chinese king wanted to have built some temples with proper Hindu and Buddhist gods. Now he wanted to have a kind of a artist who can create a good sculpture. And the place called Patan in Nepal. It's in Nepal now. It's a relatively big town in Nepal. Patan was known for the sculpture art and art for creating and making the statues and all. So that king has invited the people from Patan, and 70 people went to China in 12th century, and the leader was a person called Balbahu. Balbahu. He was that time only 17 years old. When the group of 70 artists reached to China, the king gave them the various different kind of tasks, temple building and all those things. Therein, the king found that this Balbao is superior, superb. He was doing an excellent work in construction. At the same time, his creativity is much better. So the king gave this Balbahu a task of making his own palace, and then he created the palace very well. Then that's most interesting part. Then that time the Beijing was about to, he was making a town called Beijing. So town planning was going on. So the king gave this Balbahu, whose name now become Arniko. In Chinese language, it was Arniko. So the king gave the task of town planning of Beijing, and this guy Arniko or Balbahu, he did the town planning of Beijing. And most important, whenever we talk about China's symbol is the slant height kind of rooftops. That's basically China is known everywhere in the world. You just want to show the China, then show such kind of slant heights kind of rooftops. That design of slant height rooftops is created by this Arniko or Balbahu. And to respect him, to give him the respect to this Arniko, on the 1st May 2002, Chinese government built a 6 feet statue of this Balbahu in one of the squares of Beijing. And at the bottom of that statue, they have written that he is the person, Balbahu, in bracket Arniko, was a person who did the town planning of this city, Beijing, and who gave the shape of this, rooftop shape. And it was written in two languages, two languages. One is in Chinese, Mandarin, other is in Devanagari script. You call it Hindi or Marathi script. It's called Devanagari script, but language is Nepalese, because today this Patan town is in Nepal. Point here is that, this is a great kind of addition or this great kind of achievement of Indian people, which was there for the China. Second thing, there are a lot of Chinese people who were quite interested about the Indian way, the Indian Upanishad, Indian Puran, Indian religion, along with the Buddha religion as well. Later on, Buddha. So there are many people who took the Indian books along with them, and they translated it into Chinese. So there are a lot of Chinese manuscripts are there, which carries the Ved and Upanishad in those days kind of literature. Now, interesting, there are few books which are not there even in India and not there even it was anywhere in the world. One was some Sankhyakiya, some book name was Sankhyakiya or something. That book was not available in India because of this Muslim invader came to India and they, burn all the literature and books and all those things. Somehow, fortunately, that Chinese translation was there in China. So they found out and then they retranslated it from China to Sanskrit. So now the book is available in India as well. Point is, there is a lot of, Indian or Hindu impact of all their Hindu ethos, Hindu values, Hindu culture, Hindu system, Hindu civilization was there in the entire Southeast Asia. I think that was a major, kind of consideration one should have about the Indian.
There's a lot more to talk, but you mentioned some very important point that most of the Indians refer to their own history from the version of Chinese travelers. But there is a lot of history written by our own kings, Vijayanagar Empire, Chola history. All those scriptures are somehow hidden. But I came to know of one such book written in, actually, I read the English translation. I couldn't find the original one. Is written by Vijayanagara himself, authorized copy of Vijayanagara's history. It's available in Mysore, University of Mysore. And if you ever get to hold of this book, please do let me know. Now, in that, the version of the governors is written. So one is a traveler telling you the account of what he can see. And he can only see what he is allowed to see, and also he can see what he is known to see. Just like if you go to any other country, we rely on guides. And we can only see what is available in the guides unless we live there for 15 years, 20 years. Now, these Chinese travelers were just traveling through the city. So they just wrote some vague observations, and they interpreted in their own way. And you are absolutely right. If you go to Lhasa, Avatikaleshwar, Indra, Yamraj, and Krishna is called Avatikaleshwar, one of the main bodhisattva of Lhasa. So they saw all the Vishnu incarnations and called them bodhisattva because they're all connected to Buddha. And the Vedic Puranas, they mention Buddha as a Vishnu avatar. Even today, Jayadev wrote a poem in which he mentioned about Buddha. And Buddha's description in Bhagavad Purana also, where Garga Muni speaks about who gave the name Krishna. He speaks about that he will appear in future as Kalki and Buddha. In many places it is mentioned. Chinese accepted it as it is. But this is one thing we need to know, that a traveler's account can only be superficial because he's just traveling. Some more research needs to be done, and there are more Indian travelers, because before any military expedition, nobody is going to put their soldiers in a foreign land without a proper research. Nobody. Common sense. It's a common sense. So in Vietnam, when the American forces were fighting with the North Vietnamese, American forces record that there were so many temples that we were scared to bomb them. There's American military record that they were scared to bomb them because they thought that the people lived in the temples. So to remove them, Americans used depleted uranium. It was the uranium devices they used to defeat the North Vietnamese. But they could not fight because nuclear bombs don't work in a very unless you have a huge explosion, They do not work in a hilly area. And that's how in 1979 Vietnamese defeated Chinese also, because
Yes.
you cannot fight in the if you don't know the terrain over there.
Mm.
So so the record of Indian travelers is missing everywhere, which other universities carry. Like I would tell you, University of Cairo
Mhm.
records that Bhagwan Ram visited in the I mean his kingdom spread to North Africa.
Mm.
University of Cairo records. University of Moscow records that Chandragupta Maurya ruled the whole world, the entire Jambu Dweep as well as Shaka Dweep. But Indian universities don't teach. It's very funny.
Very
And
funny.
so one country you missed out, Brunei, and also you
Brunei,
missed.
yeah. I just would like to add a little bit. I was in Brunei around 3 years back.
Uh-huh.
I was giving some training and something to the Ministry of Finance people there. And Brunei, last day they gave me the dinner and all. They invited me for the dinner and all. I was talking to one of the senior officials from the Ministry of Finance. I asked them, their name of their capital is Seri Bhagwan Seri Bhagwan uh, uh, Bandar Sri Bhagwan. Sorry, Bandar Seri Bhagwan. Bandar Seri Bhagwan is the name of the capital of Brunei. Now, Brunei is a Muslim country. We all are aware about it. Complete Muslim country. They follow all the Muslim rules and all. So I was very surprised. I said that, look, this, the meaning of the Bandar Seri Bhagwan. He said, yes, Bandar means port. In Sanskrit, Bandar is port. Shri is the prefix, is a very respectful prefix. Like Shri, we call it Shri, Shri Rama, and like that. And Bhagwan is the God, Hindu name of God. I said, but you are a Muslim country and you didn't have any objection for this kind of Hindu name. He said, why? Why should we have objection? This is our heritage. This is our own. Now, I was really surprised. So, as you rightly said, Brunei, in the Brunei, the people are proud that their capital name is Bandar Seri Bhagwan, which is a Hindu name, and talking about the Hindu god, Bhagwan. But they do not have any objection because they know it's their own heritage, which they have to preserve it. I think that's the beauty of country like Brunei, and that has to be there everywhere. Like Indonesia has maintained that. As I said, that in Indonesia, everywhere when we go, we see that it's a Hindu heritage. They have maintained, like Thailand, like all these countries, they maintain that, and they are proud of it.
You can change the faith, but not the culture. That's the whole point.
Yes,
You can change the faith, and you cannot change, but you cannot change the way of life and the thought process also, because Southeast Asians, they really think like us. So if we want to be conjuice, they are also super conjuice. Same thing.
yes, very true, very true.
It's a very different mindset than the European traveler, because Europeans are they're just fighting for their faith. It's pretty much very
Mm.
clear. That's why I call them faith-based colonialists. The last
Yes,
point is that we did miss out Malaysia, which is a huge country.
yes, 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 yes.
So Malaysia, the word Malaya is
Malay,
in
yes,
Mahabharata also.
yes, in
That
Mahabharata.
Bhim and
See,
Ghatotkacha was given the entire Malaya, and when you talk about Malaya, and it also mentions all the other islands of Malaya Desh, so
yes,
including Indonesia and everything. And Ramayana does mention about Sugriva, uh, when he went out to search for Sita, used all the islands of Southeast Asia, including Bali, Sumatra, and everywhere, and then he crossed over the Pacific towards the South America, because it's a very easy way towards there in that way if you go. Uh, so that is also mentioned over there, and
yes,
if you look at the geography of South America and reaching South America from this side, very few people have attempted. Very few people. The reason is the ocean levels have risen, and also many of the islands have vanished, which were there. But if you look at the topographic map without the water of the earth,
mhm,
then there are enough islands which are just 30 feet under the water, or just 10 feet under the water, 20 feet under the water throughout the entire path. And we did record that session with many other people in this show, and that there is a research which is still lacking, where we can record all those incidents also, that how Sugriva reached South America, but the record, but the South America description is there. That is for sure in Ramayana
Yes,
itself.
yes,
So,
very.
but thank you so much. A lot of information today. In fact,
My
I
pleasure.
feel that we can pick up each and every country
Yeah.
and talk more in detail. So thank you so much, Prashant Poolji, for today. And
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
we'll cover it at the second session of this show, in which we
Yes.
go to the West.
Yes. Yeah. Sure.
All
Thank you
right.
very much.
Namaskar.
Bye.
Thank you.